Hi everybody, Dr. Tanner here again. Let's look at the IRB application, part one. So before I get into that, I just wanted to touch base with you on your dissertation course progression. You've already done your prerequisites. You've completed 736. You're now in 839. I've listed the items there in the tile that we're going to work on. And then you have 930 and 931 and defense. Woohoo! Okay, so your end target, for those of you doing quants, you need 100 pages. That does not include your title page or your references. For those of you doing qualitative studies, it's 45,000 words. Okay? And I wouldn't worry too much about the words. I've never had anybody do a qualitative study and fall short because you're going to have all that thick, rich data from your interviews, and that really adds to your word count. Your IRB application. So that's what I really want to talk about is the IRB. If you have not done your city exam yet, go ahead and do that and save that. I would like everybody to have a folder in your OneDrive and label that folder IRB. Then you can put everything that you need for the IRB into that folder. So the first thing that you need to put in there is your city certificate. Put that in there, okay? And you can share that folder with me. That way, if I can't find something on your application, I can look in your folder and see that you have it or if you don't have it. Okay, who knows what the IRB is for? So an institutional review board exists anywhere that the research is done. So hospitals, pharmacies, universities, pretty much any place that does human subjects research has an IRB. The IRB oversees that research. It ensures that people are not mistreated. The company that I consult for has an IRB. And the IRB's number one purpose is to protect the people in the study. It's not to determine if your research is valid or if your findings are credible. The IRB doesn't do that. The IRB protects people. So ask yourself, I'm going to take time away from people. Maybe I'm going to be taking these people away from other researchers. I might be making participants feel uncomfortable. Is my study still worth it? Everyone here must have IRB approval. If you're doing secondary data, the approval will likely be very fast. If your study involves human subjects with minimal risks who are not vulnerable, you'll have expedited approval, which is also pretty quick. But if you're using a vulnerable population like children, pregnant women, prisoners, parolees, those approvals take longer and they might not even be allowed. So pretty much everybody here is an expedited review. Here's an overview of the steps. You were invited to an IRB and research process presentation. When you're completing the IRB, only answer the questions that pertain to your research. Many times there are questions that do not pertain to your study. We talked about city training, we talked about expedited review, but before you submit your application, once it's all done, I do need to look at it. All right, students who let the faculty look at the application typically get through with no more than one kickback. Most get through the first time. When there's an issue, it sort of puts the IRB on notice that there are issues. So please let me see your application first. So every week we're going to focus on different sections of the IRB. You're going to use the IRB application, a Microsoft Word document that is in the dissertation handbook. You must have approval from your chair, that's me, on the Microsoft Word version before you can submit it online. So the first thing we need to do is determine your research questions. You do need more than one research question, and they need to be aligned, manageable, and feasible. You can get the study done in the 4 quarters and get your research questions done in that time. Think about your method and design. ensure that they align. Look in your Cresswell book for research questions that align with your methodology. Quantitative studies use prediction, impact, effect, how many. Send me your research questions so we can determine if they align. And then you'll work on sample size, which will be impacted on your method and your design. Every choice you make will create a flowchart outlines of the paths that you can take it. It will also close off paths. For example, choosing quants will close off open-ended questions. Start thinking deeper. Think about these things. A survey, or scales, is an instrument used in quants to collect the measured data for measuring variables to determine which hypotheses you can reject. Your instrument must be reliable and valid with a Cronbach statistic that you can cite in Chapter 3. If not, you'll have to pilot an instrument to get reliability and validity statistics. And that takes a very long time. It could possibly add to the length of time it takes you to complete your study. So think about variables. What do you need to measure? Who else has measured them? And will this work for your study? Interview questions are part of a qualitative research protocol. Most qualitative methods use interview questions. It's called an interview protocol. And we'll work together. We'll have an expert review of your interview questions. You'll field test your interview questions. And so we'll talk about what those involve later. You can also talk to your methodologist about your interview protocol. But again, that comes later after you have a committee. On your IRB application, you will discuss the background information. So that's the background of your study. Why are you doing it? Why is it important? Who cares? You're going to have your research questions. You're going to have your research procedures. And you're going to have the risks and benefits. So go to the IRB area to locate the folder with the application. And then start working on it. Explain the background and the problem. Show the IRB why it's important. Include a statistic or a citation from a recent study, so 2023 or newer, that shows that this is important. Why do we care that we tell the IRB that there's a problem we need to research, right? Human subjects, risk, reduce harm. The IRB needs to know that. Who will be harmed if you do not conduct the research, right? So you decide, well, I'm not going to do this study. Who gets harmed by you not doing the study, right? This is really your problem. Doing the study is going to solve that problem and reduce that harm. The background and the problem will be your Chapter 1. Get your template, figure out how to write this as an elevator pitch. Not pages and pages of text and lecturing. Just state the facts, the issue, why it's important, and be done. Okay, that's your elevator speech for Chapter 1. And that's what you need for your background and problem statement for the IRB application. Research questions. Think about whether your question can be answered with data is a really good start. If you could ask 4 to 5 people the question and come away with the answer, that is not enough. Think about it in a doctoral level, and you do need more than 2 research questions. Keep your questions aligned. If we're talking quants, we can compare variables and also have a relationship between the variables. So 2 birds, 1 stone. I recommend between 3 and 5 research questions. All right, I don't want to go into the mapping research questions to data analysis too much right here because this goes deep down into quants. This aligns the research questions with how you plan to gather data, with analysis, and with the conclusion that you hope for. Let's look at some quants. So comparative. There's no descriptive studies are allowed, right? You cannot have descriptive studies. You can use a t-test to compare two variables. You can use ANOVA for more than two variables. Relational is correlation and regression. If you have not done comps, you will get questions on these tests. So be prepared to analyze the results of any one of these three tests. So think about your data types and when you are preparing your research questions and your alignment table. Nominal labels are for grouping. You're not measuring, you're just giving names or markers that stand for some kind of meaning. Gender, maybe, hair color, where you live, years of experience. Different types of variables should be mixed and matched within the study. Ordinal is when order matters. So Likert scales are considered ordinal, although a few do consider them nominal. For the most part, though, they're ordinal. Interval and ratio scales. Intervals can go negative, ratios cannot. Temperature is an interval that can go negative. Height is a ratio that will always be positive. All right, the basics. Inferential statistics makes an inference to reach a conclusion about a larger population, which is why sample size is critical. It comes into play in determining bias, error level, effect size, etc. It's critical in determining if the results will be generalizable out to the masses. So we're going to talk about sample size, and those of you doing quants, you're going to need to download G-Power because that's how you determine your sample size. Every single test has its own sample size, and that's why we use G-Power. We can download and use the tool, plug in our information, it'll calculate the sample size. We need to be able to reach the power that we have predetermined we need for the study, which in social science, typically your power is 80%. So once you get your sample size, that's the minimum to pull for your study. The more variables, the more questions, etc., will increase your sample size. There are many great instruments out there for smaller sample size. All right, next you pick your p-value, which is usually 95%. Remember, if the p is low, the null must go. The lower the p number, the more significant your findings. All right, and we can thank Dr. Levine for that cute little saying, if the p is low, the null must go. Moving on. Take a look at these examples. I'm going to include this PowerPoint so that you can review this slide. So take a look at the examples on the posted PowerPoint if you plan on using the t-test. Here's a research question for ANOVA. It's an example. Usually you'll have 3 groups for an ANOVA. Post hoc tests for ANOVA will be needed, and you'll explain and describe these in Chapter 3. Pearson's R is the most common statistical test for correlation. Predictive questions are great. Chi-square. It's a bit like accounting. It's as close to being descriptive without being descriptive. So we don't allow descriptive statistics, but you can use chi-square. Many universities don't allow chi-square. It's often a great tool for showing goodness of fit. Okay, the learning commons. This is a reminder that we do have tutors to help you with statistics. Yes, these slides are very statistics oriented because it scares many people. Few doctoral faculty will stand up and profess their comfort with statistical tests. I, for one, will not stand up and profess my comfort. I will happily profess my discomfort with statistical tests. Remember the principle of parsimony, keeping things simple as you write up the results. That's critical. So here are some non-examples from the IRB. These questions cannot be normalized. So if every single school has different requirements, how do you make that into a quantitative study? You don't. Variables cannot be measured. If they can, they're not the same for everyone. And then the second question is multiple choice. It's also descriptive. So that's not a good question. Yes, no, or true, false questions are not appropriate for a study. You don't want to spend a year on your study and have the answer be yes, right? So review these questions in the PowerPoint handout and wrap your head around why they won't work. All right, so look at the blue comment here. We ask, why compare specific counties? This is where you need to have a valid connection between your research and reality. So the statistic that shows that this is a real problem, and you have literature that explains what the problem is, that's when it's justifiable to have specific counties. Final thoughts about research questions. Yeah, they're the linchpin that holds the paper together. They determine the methods. If your research questions are too shallow, you have nothing to talk about. Yes or no research questions, you have nothing to talk about. So develop 2 or more. Again, I recommend 3 to 5 to add depth to your research and extend the dissertation. So this slide is pretty important. This is your data log or your research log. Think back to a minute when you were in high school and you were taking a chemistry or biology class. Most of us have dissected something in high school, right? A frog, a fetal pig, a worm. When you did that, your teacher made you keep a log of everything you did as you dissected that creature. I want you to do that. I don't want you to dissect something, but I do want you to use a spreadsheet, a Word document, or an online tool. And when I say show me your research log, you can show me what you have done on any day towards the study. You do not need to log what you did for your literature review, but you do need to log the changes that you made to Chapter 2, starting with your 839 course, right? Because Chapter 2 was finalized, kind of, sort of, in 736. But now, when you make changes to your Chapter 2, you need to go ahead and log those. We will do this so that we can recreate your steps. This critical information for replicating your study. Any study that is not replicable loses credibility. So to make your study replicable, you need clear steps in the write-up. If they're not clear or skipped or research is not done, you lose credibility. If you have fake or hallucinated references, you lose credibility. The research log is your proof, and it will help you answer questions. You want Chapter 4 to be easy to write, and you can do that if you have a log. If you're using archival data, for example, exactly where did you get it? How did you find it? What did you do with it? Once you get your quantitative data using JASP, explain how you clean the data. Did you look for missing data? How did you correct for missing data? What was your plan for outliers? Step by step by step, explain what you did, what you found, what happened when you collected your data. What day, what month, what year were these steps taken? I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, it was critical to know exactly when data was collected. In February, the pandemic wasn't full-blown, right? In July of 2020, we were all locked down. That's why these dates are critical. I require that you use a research log with dates, times, and processes. We talked about a lot of things on this slide already. It'll depend on what type of study you are conducting, and we will discuss these things in our one-to-one meetings. Risks and benefits. There is always, always, always a minimal risk associated with participating in any research. Secondary does not have minimal risk. So if you're using secondary data, you don't have minimal risk. All other data has risks. When doing this section of the IRB, think about the risks. Even if you are just taking someone's time, that's a minimal risk. It's still a risk. If risks get close to not being minimal, how will you mitigate those risks. Take time, for example. The risk will be mitigated by writing a clear, concise design survey, a logical format, a clean platform to click on the survey buttons. That's how you're mitigating the risk of using people's time. In social science, we do not have some of the physical or psychological risks. Intention to leave one's job, for example, can move into the risk factor and must be described. Your next steps: get into the classroom, look at week 1, go to the content area, print out the APA changes PDF, because it also includes the exceptions that the university wants you to use. Follow the rules for APA 7. Remember, folks, I'm here for you. And, if depending on the feedback I get for these PowerPoint discussions, I could probably include some fairly frequently. Okay, bye-bye.